working this morning. So,
Okay. Well, I'm listening, so.
all right. You might, I do show a few things.
Okay.
So I don't know, you might want to take a look at those.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. So this is the session entitled The Difference Between High School Support and College Support for the IEP Student. And I feel like it's like, oh gosh, well, Dr. Young this morning talked about like accommodations and modifications, and I'm going to talk a little bit about those, but there are some definite things that are different for students in the college setting that they get used to in high school. So when I go through these, if you have any questions, by all means, let me know. This is my contact information. Like Dr. Young this morning, I actually came from a music education background and then did substitute teaching for the IU. After I was a stay-at-home mom, I tell people I took an 18-year maternity leave. But when I did that day-to-day substitute teaching in special ed, I knew I made a mistake. And so I added special ed certification to my teaching certificate. But then pretty much right from the start of taking those master's credits, I did master's in teaching and curriculum at Penn State. And I chose that because I knew, I hoped that education had changed somewhat given the gap between my undergraduate degree and my master's degree. And so all of my research focused on secondary transition. And I actually used like the students that I had in class and really dove into transition with that. Then I added supervision. Then I went back and added through Penn State cooperative education. So I delved even deeper like into the world of work and how that impacts secondary transition. So I know like a lot of dumb stuff about transition, but just things just because I've just spent, you know, a long time in the world of transition. And so how that impacts students from like, what if they're kiddos that think they're going to go to college when they're in school and then all of a sudden they graduate and they find out, oh my goodness, this is different. So you should have an idea of some of those differences. Just like our Zoom meeting norms, I am assuming good intentions. And if you have any information, you know, relative to this topic and you're thinking, Melinda, I'm not quite sure that's right, or I don't know what you mean, by all means, speak up. Remember, you get Act 48 after you complete the evaluation, and you have until Friday to do that. In this webinar, I'm hoping that the attendees will learn about allowable accommodations for students seeking a degree in the college setting. And I have a little disclaimer here because some people maybe know about the Hiram G. Andrews Center in Johnstown. The accommodations I'm talking about are for typical college, for post-secondary education in general, not a Hiram G. Andrews, because their college programs do provide a bit more support, especially if you're talking that you have an intellectual disability or an emotional disability. And there are also college programs that are designed specifically for students with an intellectual disability. And those are programs that you do not get a degree in. You get just like a certificate that you participated in the life skills program. I'm not talking about any of those programs either. I'm talking about regular old, what you would think of in a typical setting as college. And the other thing that I hope people will realize is, you know, college is a big and expensive decision. And often when we talk about a student with an IEP, depending on that student, they are accustomed to maybe having a lot of things provided for them. There is no cost to attend a program at your local high school. They don't have to pay for any of the support that they get, but it's not the case with college. You pay for everything when you're in college. So I want us to consider for a minute the game of baseball. And at my family, we like the Phillies, so that's why that's the team that's being shown. Their lovely shot there of their stadium. And when you consider a baseball team, it's that team approach with all of the people that are going to be supporting the student. So we're talking that there are 9 people on the team. And I often think of a baseball analogy with students when they're in high school, and especially those students that say they're going to go to college, because it's kind of like we've provided them with this 9-member team supporting them, and now all of a sudden they're on a 5-member team or 4-member team. That's how the students, at least in part, feel. That's often how their parents feel about the subject of transition. Nonetheless, I always think that it's a good time to talk about transition, because everything about the student and the accommodations you have for college speak to entitlement versus eligibility. And it's different laws for different settings. So when you are in high school, everything is under IDEA. And the day you graduate, literally the very next day, now it's the ADA that applies. So you have to be deemed eligible for everything. And that is a very big difference. I would be remiss if I did not first thank Lori Shoemaker, who is the Student Access Services Director at the York Hack Campus, or Linda Miller, who's the Director of the Student Access Disability Services at York College. Both of these ladies have used this exact information when they present to our students at a transition event. And in fact, back before COVID, which seems like a super long time ago, in November, we had a college event at the York Learning Center, and a lot of this information is almost exactly what was presented there. It's just, it's me presenting the information instead of Lori and Linda. If you have any questions about anything today regarding the Summer Institute, just a reminder, you can find that schedule on the Day 3 matrix for today. So now, what about that IEP in college? Well, the IEP ends after somebody leaves high school. So the student who one day was an IEP student and the next day is going to be a college student, they still have that IEP, and it's still an important document, and it still can be used as part of documentation along with some other pieces of documentation, but it no longer carries the same entitlement with it. And it's because now it's a different law that is going to govern what types of accommodations can be given. Receiving services in college is up to the student. And that is so incredibly important for somebody to self-identify, for somebody to self-advocate for what they need. Because to access services in college, the student must call and identify themselves to whatever they name the Office of Disability Services at their campus. They must identify that they have a disability. If they don't do it, nobody's going to do it. And that also means their parents are not allowed to call and identify for them. The student must be independent in using whatever accommodations they ask for. Now, I can tell you that colleges are very different in some of the things that I'm going to talk about. And when I think of the self-identifying piece and who all somebody's going to allow to talk to whom about this student with the disability, that can vary from institution to institution. But the student going in and saying, here is something that I need for me to be successful. Here is my documentation that proves my need for this. They need to be the person to go in and do that. The need for a student to practice self-advocacy can never be underestimated. Never. And that is a big thing that can come from working with students in elementary school, in middle school, and then on into high school. Students need to practice self-advocacy as much as possible so that they learn to become this strong voice for no matter what they want to do after they leave school. Some tips that I always offer for all high school students, but I actually am pushing very big this year on having lots of student-led IEP conferences. Students should participate in their IEP and 504 meetings. Students need to start practicing self-advocacy skills now, no matter what age they are. And if they are a student who is planning on going to college, they need to start taking those high school courses now that will benefit them in college. So how can you kind of tell if a student is a self-advocate? Can they discuss their disability? Do they know why they need what they're asking for? Do they know their learning strengths and weaknesses? Do they understand the academic impact of their disabilities? And do they really understand their accommodations and what they are requesting? There is a very big difference between what the parent discusses and what the student says on their own. And I'm thinking of the parent at an IEP meeting who is saying, my child is going to go to college and my child is going to need this. And the student is just sitting there letting the parent talk for them. It's the student that needs to learn to talk about what they need. So right now, and I'm specifically even thinking of the time during COVID, the time when students might be learning on their own at home or learning virtually, and everybody had, you know, a good 2 months of that towards the end of the 1920 school year. You know, how did those students do with time management and organization? How were they with their own motivation? How did students respond to like having to study when they themselves were responsible for their schedule and learning on their own and taking notes for learning? Were they intrinsically motivated to do something on their own? I would almost contend that if a student during this COVID closure time that we had could not keep themselves on track for 2 months, motivating themselves to continue and finish work on their own, if they were not capable of doing that, they most certainly are not capable of going to college, because college has a lot of downtime. Students without IEPs can't be successful when they go to college often because they have way too much free time. And I actually think that students with and without IEPs are the same there, because it's really time for a student to consider, for a parent to actually say, this is a real expensive decision we're making here, kiddo. Are you really intrinsically motivated? Are you willing to do the work on your own without mom or dad helping you, without mom or dad getting you up in the morning? Are you capable of doing that? As a teacher, I'm also asking teachers to consider, how well do teachers manage their own downtime? And are they flexible in adapting their schedule? Because part of a student advocating and needing to have success in this collegiate setting depends on how flexible they are and how good they are at being adaptable to their surroundings and to changes that are going to pop up. My background in all of this, as a work experience and transition consultant for IU 12, I know that I used to be like, I want to say almost like secretly thrilled if someone had to have, let's say they said they wanted to go to college, and I was brought into a district and I was told to talk to them as a transition consultant about what is expected in college. A lot of times when I would do that, and it was a district student, and I was coming into an IEP meeting and I was providing advice to a parent, and I would say, you know, could I recommend that you first consider going to HAC, local community college, and enroll in courses there and get some of those gen ed classes out of the way. Let's see how so-and-so, your student, does with those classes. As a parent, that same advice fell on deaf ears. You know, my background in this is, you know, I would look at people as a transition consultant and I would say, you know, with managing your own time, with being motivated to do things on your own, does your student take care of your own wash? Oh my gosh, no, I do their wash for them. As a parent, my kids did their own wash, and I'm still hoping that the youngest son, who graduated a year ago with a degree in engineering, gets a handle on that. You know, to me, like, it's like you have to take care of those very ordinary things so you're going to have success in those bigger things in life. This is what I do know as a parent and as a transition consultant. There are things that trip up students with a disability, and there are things that trip up just students in general. And those things in college are social settings and social media. There are things, subjects that maybe parents of students with disabilities don't want to think about: sex, drugs, alcohol, desire for friendships. You cannot underestimate the importance of how your child is going to be able to advocate for themselves, know who they are, and manage their own free time enough, because that's going to sink anybody. And when I talk about that as a transition consultant, I'm speaking specifically to a population of students, and they maybe think, well, someone will be there to look out for them. Someone will help them make the right choice. Someone will be their friend. Someone will make sure they don't get into trouble. There is nobody like that in college, not for somebody with a disability, not for somebody without a disability. You have to know who you are before you make this decision. In college, accommodations cannot lower the standard or change the fundamental requirements of a program course. The course standards are always going to take precedence over the accommodation. And this is why, when we had that list this morning from Dr. Young, you know, complete an assignment orally, extend time, fewer questions, scaffolding instruction, In the college setting, there is one of those that is typically allowed. Extended time on test. You can also tell them, well, I need to have teaching in a resource room, kind of, teaching at the testing center because there aren't as many distractions there. Yes, you will be given that. You can ask for, I'm going to record lectures because I'm not very good at taking notes. A teacher is actually allowed to say, you're not allowed to record me. And if you're in their class, you say, well, but I went to the Office of Disability and they said that I'm allowed to ask for recording lectures. And the professor is allowed to say, I understand that, but you're not recording in my room. I don't allow students to do that. And the teacher, the professor, is allowed to do that. You are allowed to have somebody take notes for you. So what that is a note taker, and those are students that are paid and they take notes. And that's what they do. They take notes. They don't explain the notes to you. They don't explain what they meant by this. They literally just take notes for you, and then they give you the notes and you have to figure them out. You are allowed to ask for a textbook in a different format, like have the textbook read to you. But if the textbook is being read to you in an alternate format, nobody is going to explain what is meant by the oral reading of that book. The extended time on test that is allowed, it's typically time and a half. The limited distraction testing is definitely provided, but it is at the discretion of the professor giving the test. And I will give you a firsthand example of this with the son who graduated with a degree in engineering from Penn State. Many of their math tests throughout every year, there's a lot of math when you're an engineer, are in the evening. It's how they have their testing up at main campus for Penn State. And so you can say, well, instead of taking this test when everybody else is taking it, and maybe everybody else was taking it from 7 to 9 in the evening in a giant lecture hall, and there were like maybe 100 people taking the test, and you wanted to take it in the testing center. Had a teacher say, oh, that's fine. Once I'm done with that and grading those tests, I will send the test down to the testing center and you can take it from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. And Nathan said to me, I don't think that's going to work for me. I can't finish taking the test at 1 in the morning. I would agree with that. But that professor very clearly was sending a message of, you're going to take the test and I will let you take it at the test center, but the test center is not going to get the test until I'm finished grading the current tests. And then I'll see that they get their electronic copy. And the professor was allowed to do that. That's how it is. So you have to know that accommodations that maybe you're used to getting doesn't mean you're going to get them. Just because you can ask for something like that, taking the test in another room, doesn't mean you're going to get what you're asking for. That very much applies to college. These are high school things that are definitely viewed as not being a reasonable accommodation. You may not have a word bank for a test. The test is not modified in any way. It is the exact same test that everyone else is taking. You do not have unlimited time to complete something, a test or any assignment. You do not get to take a test more than once. And this, for many classes, is a very big thing because sometimes in college, your grade is dependent only upon perhaps 3 grades, test grades, maybe a homework assignment grade that's like 5% of your grade, and attendance that's 5% of your grade. But it's those 3 grades are very important. If you have a behavior plan in high school and it worked for you and you had lots of reinforcement, that's wonderful. That will not happen in college. And generally speaking, you don't get to have extra time to complete assignments. There are, of course, exceptions. If somebody is very ill and they go in with documentation, are they allowed a grace period to extend their time to complete an assignment? Yes, but you do not get extra time just because you need more time to write a paper or complete a big project. Professors do not have to modify their curriculum at all or their assignment deadlines. Most professors expect students to consult a syllabus to know what's expected, when stuff is due, and when tests are scheduled. Very few, they will have things posted online. Some have a calendar and put the dates of their assignments on the calendar, but when something's due is when it's due. The test grade thing I already mentioned. And in general, students need to work about 2 hours or more outside of class for every hour that they spend in class. So that means if you are in college and you are taking 15 credits, so you have 5 3-credit classes, you have a lot of free time. But with that free time, now those 15 credit hours are requiring 30 hours of study time. So all of a sudden it's a 40-hour, 45-hour work week just to get your work done for everything that you have in school. Parents don't automatically have the right to speak to staff at school. And this is a very hard one for parents to come to terms with. Students must first sign a release form so that parents can talk to the college about like a placement test result, student account information, academic records, financial aid, personal information, disability services. As a student, you do not have to allow your parents access to all of this information. You can pick and choose. And I know as far as the disability services offices go, I know of a disability service person locally at a school who, when they have parents call them to talk about the student, they first say, you must talk to the student must come to me, and then I'll talk to you. And the parent says, but I signed, you're allowed to talk to me. And they said, I understand, but I'm putting the responsibility for this first on you contacting the student and the student contacting me. I also know of a case of a local school where a parent once a week has a conversation with a disability service coordinator at a local college. And I know this young lady who is in college, and this parent is very heavily involved in her collegiate life. And I understand why, because I know the background, but I do have to question the wisdom in that, because at some point in time, this lady does want to use her college degree and have a job of her own. At what point is the mother going to be able to pull back? I don't know that answer. So sometimes the disability service person helps put something in place, and sometimes they don't. And both ways are correct. It really depends. So let's say you're teaching and you have a student in your classroom, and that student says, I want to go to college. What are the steps? So first, the student applies and is accepted to the college. And after they're accepted to the college, they will need to submit documentation and apply for services at the Disability Services Office. This is confidential information. It's not part of something that everybody at the college knows. Just the Disability Services Office knows you have applied for this. and they will set up a meeting with the student, and they're going to talk through what they're going to need and what is going to be helpful for that student. After they do that and they've provided all the documentation that they need, then the disability service person will give the student some type of documentation that they will be able to show the teachers on their first day of class. And that's how the student accesses accommodations and uses them independently. You can see this is a process. And something new that just happened in this past school year, new to me, a local school had a student who applied and was accepted. They asked for their documentation, and the parent contacted the high school and said, you have to do certain kinds of testing on my child because this college says this is what they need. Each LEA will make the determination if they get that phone call, what they're going to do, but actually that's not quite correct what the parent said. The high school doesn't actually have to provide that documentation. You as the student at the school do. And so if they ask for something and you don't have it, you as the parent might have to pay for testing that is needed. So you want to make sure when the student is still in high school and they've applied and they're accepted, that you've already kind of started to talk to that college's disability services office to find out what exactly it is that they're going to need. Often what they need is a copy of the most recent IEP and the evaluation report. They need a comprehensive psychological evaluation, and they probably also need information from the doctor that impacts the comprehensive psych eval that was done. Now, it is possible that other forms are needed too, and if other kind of information is needed, that's why you want to go directly to the disability service office so that you know exactly what it is that you're going to have. It all comes back to initially knowing when you have that student and they say they're going to go to college. Is that student going to be able to get into college the same way any student would get into college? In other words, are they going to be able, if it's a four-year school, to take the PSAT, the SAT, the ACT? Are they going to be able to provide the correct documentation to be admitted as a student? And then, assuming that answer is yes, can they advocate for themselves what they are going to need to be successful in college? And if the answer to that is yes, is what they're asking allowed for in that particular college's interpretation of the Americans with Disability Act? That's kind of like the third part that you have to consider, because what some schools will allow and the extent to which they will allow it is different from one institution to the next. So I'm wondering, Heather, do you have any questions?
It's something that stuck out to me that you touched on was student-led IEP meetings.
Yes.
And it's something that I had thought about and kind of looked into myself, but I never actually did it. I'm curious if you're following a certain template for that. Like, do you have certain questions that you have outlined? Because I've seen that some people do like a portfolio. Right. And they collect, different, documents, and the student kind of walks through it and says, this is what I've been doing in reading and math and transition, and these are my strengths and needs, and this is what I hope to do. So I just was curious kind of what you thought about that.
Yeah. Well, I actually referenced in the session right before this one student-led IEP. There's also a training that I was working on with somebody from another school district, and then they were sick, so that full day training was down to just an hour, and people at Dover attended it. I would certainly like within RIU if we had everybody say, you know, we're going to start with student-led IEP meetings. There are some slides I can send your way and give you that just sort of like give you an example of something to follow. But probably the best student-led IEP meetings are the ones where the student can stand up, especially once they kind of get that transition age, and they're saying, here's what I'm good at, here's what I need help with, here's what I hope I'm going to do after I graduate. And to whatever extent the student can speak to that along the way, all of those kinds of things just naturally build self-advocacy. And so there's almost, I don't want to say no reason to not have them. I think a lot of times people don't have them because there are some people that use that IEP as just like, we're just going to read through everything on the document. And I think it's more beneficial if the student can talk about those things, like, here's what I like about school, here's what I don't like about school, here's what I hope I'm going to do when I leave. So there are some, and that's really what most people that do them or that start to do them kind of develop slides like that and use maybe a PowerPoint and have the student talk about things just to get the ball rolling. And each year they would sort of expand a little bit on that, but to use that IEP meeting time as everybody's there, the student does their presentation and everybody's like, okay, that's great. And mom and dad sign the IEP. You don't even really read through the IEP or anything. It's the student doing their presentation and the rest is just, yep, that's how we're going to support. And this is the document that says that. And I don't know, that's like a long way from, I think, where we're ready to be with that, especially in this climate that we're coming back into. It seems like, oh, great, now we're not even doing an IEP anymore. Well, no, you still are. You still have to adhere to the dates and, you know, all the information and the gathering and everything, but instead use that meeting time to kind of just like showcase the student talking about themselves.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious.
And I can show you, I'll give you access to that stuff that we had.
Okay.
It'll just give you an idea of the different things, because the information, I was working with Tammy Fritz from Southwestern, and she started to do them. And so she has slides and stuff, but she had this summer, her mother was sick. And then I don't know if it was mom or dad's brother or sister, somebody out of state died. And she cares for her parents, but lives on her own, but she was having to drive them to wherever this funeral was. And so I didn't have any of her materials. We actually are going to present on that again in the fall, I think, and do it together. So, but I'll give you access to everything that I had from the other week with that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. But yeah, that's a perfect way to just have students. And sometimes, you know, I don't know if you ever had a student that, like, you know, maybe not so much college, but maybe college, you know, maybe the parents hear about like the programs for students with intellectual disabilities at college, and, you know, and it's kind of like, well, you could go that route, but, you know, sometimes having the student talk about themselves, it kind of can change just how everybody sees the student and can kind of help shape a more realistic outcome. I don't know if that ever comes into play with any of yours or not, but.
Okay. Yeah, I could see it, them coming out of their shell a little bit and
Right.
realizing things about themselves.
Yeah. Okay. All
Well,
right.
thank you.
Thanks so much for being the audience.
You're welcome.
And I will end the recording and sign us all out.
Okay.
Or welcome to sign yourself out. Thank you so much.
Oh,
And
you're welcome.
today.
All right. Bye.